You say no, clear, simple. I can't do that. And for a second, nobody says anything. They don't argue. They don't push. They just look at you, like they're waiting, not for your answer, for what comes after it. And you feel it immediately, that small drop in your chest, that pressure to smooth it out, to make sure it didn't land wrong. So you start talking again. It's just that I've got a lot going on. I would, but it's bad timing. Maybe another day. You're not changing your answer. You're trying to make it easier to accept. And right there, your no starts changing. Because now they're not only hearing what you decided, they're hearing what happened to your certainty the moment the room got quiet. That's the part most people miss. You think the problem is saying no. It isn't. The real problem starts 1 second later. The second you explain your no, it stops being one. They're not testing your answer. They're testing whether it stays put. And the more you support it, the less it sounds like something that's finished. And this is where it changes. Not when you say no, but in the seconds after. You give the answer. Then the room goes quiet, and your body reacts before your mind does. You lean forward slightly. Your voice picks back up. You add one more sentence, then another. You think you're clarifying, but what you're really doing is reopening something that was already closed, because a clean no ends the moment. But your extra words bring it back to life. Now it's not a decision anymore. It's a conversation again. That's the shift. And it happens in really small ways. Maybe someone asks you to stay later at work. You say no. They stop talking, just for a second. That second feels longer than it is, so you rush in with context. I'd help if I could. I just can't tonight. I've got something else after this. Or maybe it happens in your family. Someone asks you for one more favor. You say no. They go a little quiet. Maybe their face changes just slightly. And now you feel like the boundary wasn't enough. So you start cushioning it. You add warmth. You add reason. You add something to make your no feel easier to receive. And that's exactly where it weakens. Not because the word no was wrong. Because the second it created pressure, you started rescuing it. That's what changes the whole social meaning of the moment. Because people don't only hear decisions. They hear what happens to you after you make them. Most people don't notice this part, as because nothing dramatic happens. They don't argue. They don't challenge you. They don't say, I don't accept that. They just stay quiet, listening, letting you keep going. And while you're explaining, they're not processing your reasons the way you think they are. They're reading your behavior. They hear the number, but they also hear everything after it. And that's what sticks, because when you keep talking, it doesn't sound like confidence. It sounds like flexibility, like something inside you isn't settled yet, like the answer exists, but the answer still needs help. And that changes how they respond. They don't need to push hard. They just wait. Then they re-enter. Not aggressively, just slightly. What if it's quick? Just this once. Could you make an exception? What about later? Could you at least do part of it? And suddenly, your no didn't close the door. It just slowed them down. That's the real perception shift. They stop hearing finality. They start hearing movement. And once people hear movement, they don't feel like they're crossing a line anymore. They feel like they're working with a flexible answer. That's why over-explaining is so dangerous. It sounds polite to you. To them, it sounds like room. And room is all most people need. Not because they're evil, because they're reading the moment the way humans always do. They follow the signal with the least resistance. If your no is clear, they stop. If your no keeps talking, They stay in it. And once they stay in it, the interaction changes. So now they're no longer responding to your decision. They're responding to your uncertainty around it. And this is where you start losing it. Not in what you say, in what you feel. That silence after your no, it presses on you. You feel it in your chest. Your breathing changes. Your mind starts scanning. Did that sound too harsh? Did I make this awkward? Do I need to fix this? Do they think I'm being difficult? Did I just make the whole mood heavier? And the longer the silence holds, the louder that pressure gets. That's why you start talking. Not because they proved your no was weak, because your body started treating the moment like a social threat. That's the hidden mechanism. You are not only saying no, you are also trying to survive the emotional temperature that comes right after it. And most people cannot tolerate that temperature. So they reach for words, not because the boundary needs explanation, because they need relief. That's why the pattern feels so automatic. You don't plan to over-explain. You don't think, let me weaken my own boundary. It happens faster than that. You feel the discomfort. Then you start managing it. You soften your tone. You add context. You explain your intention. You try to prove that saying no does not mean rejection, hostility, or selfishness. And right there, the center of gravity shifts. The boundary is no longer standing on its own. Now it depends on whether the other person feels okay with it. That's the trap. Because once your no depends on their comfort, it stops being a decision. It becomes a negotiation disguised as politeness. And the worst part is, it feels reasonable while you're doing it. It feels mature. It feels considerate. It feels like emotional intelligence. But often it isn't. Often it's just discomfort management with better wording. But that pressure doesn't just pass. It starts defining you, quietly. You become the person whose no is never the final version. The person people don't fully stop at. The person whose first answer is treated like the beginning of a longer process. You say no, and they don't adjust. They pause. Because they've learned something about you. That your first answer is not your final position. Not because you said it differently, but because you never leave it alone. You reopen it yourself. You soften it, clarify it, support it, reframe it, translate it into something easier for other people to hear. And over time, something subtle starts happening. Your words stop carrying finality, not because you're unclear, but because people have seen you revise your own line in real time. That changes how they relate to you. They stop treating your boundaries like edges. They start treating them like surfaces they can keep pressing on. That is the identity cost. You are no longer just someone who explains too much. You become someone whose decisions seem movable, someone whose no sounds temporary, someone who can be worked on. And once that image forms, people don't always disrespect you loudly. Sometimes it gets quieter than that. They just stop taking your first answer seriously. They wait for the softer second version, the one they know is probably coming. That's the shift. You're not being dismissed. You're being read as a decision that can still move. And that's a brutal social position to live in. Because now the problem is not one weak moment. The problem is that your presence itself starts sounding negotiable. And this is where it speeds up. The first few times they wait. They let you explain. They re-enter slowly. But after a while, they skip steps. You say no, and they push immediately, because they already know what's coming next. You've trained the sequence. Different setting. Same pattern. You're on a call. They ask for just a quick favor. You say no. There's half a second. Then they go, "Come on. It'll only take a minute." Not even a real pause anymore. because they've learned something. Your no doesn't end things. It starts them. That's when pressure becomes fast, casual, low effort, and frequent. Because it works. And once it works enough times, the pattern spreads. Not just with one person, with different people, at work, in friendships, in family dynamics, in group settings, because the signal you're sending is consistent. Your boundary can be reopened if the other person waits through the silence and lets you do the rest. That's why the consequences get bigger over time. At first, it's only one extra ask. Then it becomes people assuming you'll bend eventually. Then it becomes your first no carrying less weight before you even say it. That's the real training effect. Your nervous system is trying to survive the moment. Their nervous system is learning the moment is safe to repeat, so the timing gets faster. The follow-up comes sooner. The tone gets lighter. The pressure gets more public. The re-entry gets more confident. And eventually, the second pass is not even a second pass anymore. It's just how they engage with your boundaries. That's the deepest loss. Not one disrespectful moment. Not one person being pushy. But becoming someone people try again with automatically. Because they've learned your no usually comes with a second draft. And once that happens, pressure becomes cheap. That's why this pattern is so corrosive. You don't just lose one moment. You lower the cost of pushing you in the future. So here's what it looks like when it changes. Same situation. Same ask. They look at you. Can you take this on? You pause. Then, no, I can't. And then, nothing. You don't move. You don't add. You don't repair the moment. The silence shows up again. Same pressure. Same pull in your chest. Same urge to explain. Same instinct to soften it. And this is the part most people still don't understand. Doing it right does not feel better at first. It feels harder. Because now you have to sit inside the discomfort you used to escape with words. You feel your body want to jump in. You feel the need to smile. You feel the sentence forming in your throat. The reason, the apology, the cushion. And you stop. That is the correction. Not a better sentence. Restraint. Maybe they shift slightly. Maybe they look away. Maybe they try a softer follow-up. Are you sure? Not even for a minute. What if I make it easier? And you still don't rescue the moment. You hold your position. No. That's it. No extra line. No justification. No proof that you are still kind, still reasonable, still safe. And something subtle changes right there. The conversation doesn't reopen. Because you didn't reopen it. The pressure has nowhere to go. The other person feels the boundary as finished, not because you argued harder, because you stopped feeding the part that made it negotiable. That's the difference. Not what you said, what you didn't add after. That's how a no stays a no, not by sounding stronger, by refusing to support it after it lands. A strong no doesn't convince people. It doesn't explain itself, it just ends the moment. But most people never let it get that far. They say no, and then stay there with it, talking, adjusting, softening, trying to make sure it was received well, until it doesn't sound like an ending anymore. It sounds like something still in progress, and people treat it that way. That's the difference. Not in what you said, but in whether you let it be finished. Because if your no needs help standing, they already heard a maybe.